Hello. Tanner is away this week, so I thought I would react to some unpopular ex-Mormon opinions sent in to our Instagram. And that's it. That's the video concept. Let's go. So first unpopular opinion. The pawn shoulders joke is overdone and often has a misogynistic angle. I do agree that the pawn shoulders joke is overdone. It is not funny anymore. I see how much people coming from such a tight in-group want to continue feeling like they're part of a group, and humor is a way that we sort of bond, and I think jokes like that have historically bonded the ex-Mormon community, you know, so I think it can be harmless, you know, women rocking their pawn shoulders and calling them that, I think can be a nice way that people sort of reclaim their lives and bodies and stuff after religion. As for the misogynistic angle, I don't know about that. I guess it would depend on the joke. Yeah, I guess sometimes if it's like ex-Mormon men calling out Mormon women for having pawn shoulders, then I could see it. I don't know, I could see circumstances where that's true. But yeah, I'd say on the whole, I don't think pawn shoulders jokes are very funny anymore. It's been overdone, but like I get it. I get why bad jokes become so popular. Like in Mormonism, there's so many bad jokes that get shared around, and I do think it comes from that in-group mentality. Missionary work is modern colonization and rooted in white supremacy. I think that's a valid opinion. It's very uncomfortable thinking about, like white American middle-class Mormon missionaries going to, for example, third world countries with predominantly people of color living there and trying to impose their belief system onto them, believing that it's what they really need. Yeah, that makes me uncomfortable. I just saw something the other day. I think it was just a Christian, but she was talking about how she had seen the suffering in this third world community, and she was like, these people need Jesus more than anyone, and it was just so uncomfortable. So yeah, going to other countries, especially those that have been colonized and that white people have destabilized, for example, is just, yeah, it's just also uncomfortable. Not to mention that the book of scripture they're peddling is a white man's ethnocentric narrative of Native American history and is complete bullshit and is inherently racist. Messing with missionaries is petty and unproductive. They are victims too. Better to normalize apostasy. Yeah, I agree with this. I'm not a fan of messing with missionaries. The average missionary is going out at 18, 19. And the majority of missionaries, there's a fly. The majority of missionaries have been indoctrinated since birth, essentially, with Mormonism and with the idea that they should go on a mission. Like we have, I think, like 3-4-year-olds in Mormonism singing, "I hope they call me on a mission," and getting lessons about how they should go on a mission one day. We all know that it's essentially required for boys to go. And yeah, it's hard to grow up in a high demand religion and then leave that high demand religion when, you know, your parents' pride in you, your parents' love for you, seemingly, feels so contingent upon you going on a mission. 18, 19-year-olds are so young. Like, our brains don't fully develop, I think, till we're 25, especially when it's, you know, kind of aggressive people in, like, their 30s and their 40s. It's not my cup of tea. I think much better to be nice to missionaries because they're away from home. A lot of them are suffering. And it is, Mormon missions are kind of the height of the Mormon indoctrination. Well, not the height, because there's kind of like second anointing and stuff. I don't know. It's a really intense experience. Like, it's such classic cult indoctrination stuff to take away people's names, take away their connection to friends and family. I know they've got a bit better with stuff like that, but like, it's bad. Like, Mormon missions are among the worst of Mormonism's brainwashing, in my opinion. I know the word brainwashing is a bit controversial, so no need to use that if you don't agree. I also think, you know, missionaries are taught that Satan's going to be attacking them from all sides, and I just think being aggressive in any way, or even like pranking them, or even just like trying to get them into a debate sometimes, like it can all go south pretty quick and just be unproductive. And I think as ex-Mormons, we do need to think about, are you working? We do need to think about effectiveness. So that's why I'm personally not a fan. And I think you can have more of a positive impact by just being like a healthy, happy individual, and no need to interact with Mormon missionaries at all. But if you do, could be nice to be nice, you know. I think when you're hurting and angry after you've left the LDS church, whenever that might be, it's easy to kind of take that out on the church's representatives, which is its missionaries. But just important to remember that they are like kids at the end of the day. I know like they are legally not seen as children, but they're just so young. You gotta be pretty, like, in my opinion, underdeveloped in terms of how you think about the world to go on a Mormon mission. I know when I'd first left the church, I was a lot more prone to engage with missionaries in kind of a, like, trying to get into a debate sort of way. And I think I also took it upon myself to try and almost like deconvert them or rock their faith. But I've just learned that that doesn't really work. It's a lot of time and energy. It's pretty triggering for you, the ex-Mormon, a lot of the time, or I know it was for me. I think when you're really hurting from leaving Mormonism, it's easy to sort of find ways to transfer that pain to avoid having to just accept it and sit with it. And yeah, I don't know, I just feel like missionaries can bear the brunt of a lot of people's pain sometimes, and they don't deserve it. Not all ex-Mos love to drink coffee and alcohol. I feel like this should be obvious, but yeah, coffee especially is an acquired taste. Actually, coffee and alcohol are both acquired tastes. Some might argue that one never fully develops a taste for alcohol, but then there's going to be a bunch of like whiskey lovers in the comments like, you're wrong. And I do like a nice tequila. But yeah, of course, all ex-Mormons don't love coffee and alcohol. Everything is personal choice. If you're not an atheist, you're still in denial of reality. So I would call myself an atheist in the way that most people understand that word, because there isn't proof that there's a deity. So yeah, I understand that opinion. I get it. Again, I question the effectiveness. I don't know. It's a tough one. I don't know. I've really softened over the years with how I talk about things, just because I'm so wary of pushing people away just because we're all wired to double down when we feel threatened. And I just think, like, I think it's possible to gain sort of spiritual things from religions like Christianity, but it has to be in sort of a very specific way. Like, for example, Eckhart Tolle, who's one of my favorite spiritual teachers, he's not a theist. He's just, I guess you describe him as New Age. But he talks a lot about Jesus and how we can interpret Jesus's teachings in a more secular sense. And same with the Buddha. So I think it's possible for people to be, but then again, I just feel like to get the best of religion, you have to be an atheist about it. So, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I'm just like talking it around because I'm so scared of like offending someone or upsetting someone. But yeah, there's not proof that a God exists, especially the way that, you know, most people interpret that word. So yeah. Ex-Mormons often keep the same black and white thinking they had as Mormons. Ooh. Yeah, I'm sure that can be true. And it makes sense, because if you're raised to view the world through a black and white lens, then you don't just develop the ability to see color just because you left a Haidamam religion. I do think that leaving Mormonism and having your worldview crash down around you can be great at getting you to see new colors and to not be so black and white. And I know for me, actually, I think that I was still quite black and white in the beginning, because it was almost like that's what's safe to you. That's how you've been taught to think about things. And so I think black and white thinking, I mean, children can often be quite black and white, or teenagers can be quite black and white. I think it can often be a mark of sort of immature thinking, just because it almost feels safer. Do you know what I mean? But then over time, I've got much less black and white. I don't know. If you've had kind of a similar journey, let me know. I'd be curious, because I don't want to assume that my experience extrapolates to everyone. But yeah, I do think a lot of ex-Mormons think quite black and white. I also think that's kind of understandable. Well, it is understandable. You've been raised your whole life to see things in black and white, so it takes time. And I think we should have empathy for that. And I know it can be hard when you feel like people are representing your community in a way that you don't like. That can be hard. So I understand like the ooh at the end of this message. But I also think, like, I have empathy for the fact that we can't think in ways we haven't been taught to think yet. Do you know what I mean? So I think the best thing we can do as a community is to be non-judgmental and be kind of open-minded and encourage nuance. Follow Nuance Ho on YouTube and TikTok. and everywhere. And yeah, just because you aren't Mormon doesn't make you better than Mormons. Yeah, that one should be obvious too. But I'm very skeptical just in general of ideas of anyone being better than anyone else. I think there is such a thing as, harmful versus helpful behavior. And you can make the argument that being in a high demand religion isn't exactly conducive to empathy in certain situations, especially around minority groups like LGBTQ plus people. I think there's absolutely a case to be made for how being in a high demand religion limits your ability to think critically, and how kind of high demand religion groupthink in general can be really harmful. But I think this idea that anyone's better than anyone else is bullshit, because we're all the products of our genetics and experiences. We're all just what life has made us up to this point. And as most of you watching know, like, you were Mormon once, trying your best. And yeah, I think we're all doing our best with what we know and with sort of like the resources and information that life has given us. So yeah, definitely don't think that ex-Mormons or non-Mormons are better than Mormons in any way. And I think it's important to remember that we all bleed the same. We all feel grief. Grief is kind of the great uniter of humanity. And the more we can recognize that and get away from superiority complexes, the better. Because even if someone's like the best person in the world, like just objectively so kind, so amazing, so helpful to humanity, that person has had the right kind of experiences to produce that in themselves. Do you know what I mean? Like, no one's really choosing. Challenge your ideas about free will. Also, it goes without saying that there's plenty of people outside of high demand religions who are not good at critical thinking and who don't have a lot of empathy. I feel like that doesn't need to be said, but just throwing it out there, yeah, there's absolutely people in high demand religions who are better critical thinkers or more empathetic than people outside of them, obviously. Someone said, as of right now, I don't really want to try alcohol. Completely valid. No need to try something you don't want to try. Someone said, a non-vegan lifestyle is just as illogical as a Mormon lifestyle. #go vegan. So, okay, how do I respond to this? I think that veganism is the way to go. I think once you have seen the cruelty of the meat and dairy industry, like just the way that they bring animals into existence just to suffer, once you see that, I had to have essentially a second faith crisis learning about the way animals are treated in the meat and dairy industry. There's also environmental aspects, like a vegan diet uses a lot less land. I think it's something like 18 times. Don't quote me on that. Do your own research. I'm not claiming to be a source right now. But obviously, like, we have to grow plants to then feed animals, and we get a lot more food for our land buck if we just eat the plants directly ourselves. And also there's the methane emissions from cows. There's all kinds of things around the environment and the meat and dairy industry. It's awful. And then there are some sort of health reasons to be vegan, but I wouldn't say those are quite as compelling. Like, I think at this point we know that a plant-based diet, whether that includes a little bit of meat or no meat, is the healthiest diet. But you could include a little bit of meat, and I think nutrition isn't one of those things where there is like, this is the single best diet all the time for everyone. It's not really like that. Nutrition is complicated. But anyway, for me, the reasons to be vegan are far more compelling than the reasons to continue eating meat and dairy. So is it just as illogical as the Mormon lifestyle? I mean, Mormonism makes specific claims that are demonstrably false, and the meat and dairy industry is incredibly corrupt and does do a lot to spread misinformation. But I wonder if it's quite the same, just because, I mean, I think if you're a person who's just like, yeah, I don't care about animals' feelings, like, I'm fine with the way they're treated, like, I don't know, is that illogical? I mean, I think if you just don't feel empathy for animals and what they go through, or maybe, I don't know, you do more sort of quote-unquote ethical ways of obtaining meat, like hunting, I would say, is objectively better than obviously factory farming, because you're not bringing an animal into existence just to cause it to suffer for its whole life and then kill it. Like, there's shades there. I guess, again, I'm trying to be really nuanced and PC. I do think that people are in denial about the meat and dairy industry and about eating animal products. And so I do see the links that someone could make between the illogicalness of Mormonism and how illogical it is to eat meat and dairy. But I don't know. I think there are people that are just like, I don't really care about animals. And to them, I'm like, what do you say to that, you know? Or there are people that are like, I think there are people that are misled about nutrition and the environment when it comes to this issue. There's a lot there. I'm just trying to not get into like debates in the comments. I'll put some of my favorite vegan YouTubers in the description box. So is a non-vegan lifestyle as illogical as a Mormon lifestyle? I would say no, even yes and no. I could go either way on that one, honestly. But I do think that veganism is the way to go. And I'm in full support of the vegan lifestyle. I do think that if most people saw how their meat and dairy was produced, they'd probably think twice about continuing to buy it. And I do think there is sort of a purpose, like a sort of willful ignorance in a lot of people. Like, they don't want to see that stuff. I'm not judging you if you eat meat and dairy, but I do think there is a lot that mainstream society needs to learn about how meat and dairy is made, how much animals suffer, how similar we are to animals, how much the environment is harmed by the meat and dairy industry. And not just the environment, like people too, especially. I mean, as we know, it's always poor people of color that suffer the worst and the soonest from the impacts of climate change and just from fucking everything. And there are also a lot of lies that we're told about nutrition. So, I don't know, maybe I'm just like repeating what I just said in that clip, but I do think that there is kind of a veil of delusion surrounding this issue, and so I don't want to underplay that. Like, I do feel strongly about veganism, just being real. As an ex-Mo photographer, I won't photograph/attend Mormon weddings, since they exclude non-straight couples, non-members, and historically it was even worse. I don't want my art to support or represent that, so I turn down clients despite loss of money. I totally get that. I think that's totally valid. I didn't take my name off their records because I refused to give them any authority/say. Yeah, I can see that argument. I personally removed my records because I want them to lose numbers. But I also understand people not wanting to even sort of legitimize that process, you know? Are there benefits to removing your record in terms of like the information? I feel like they just keep all your information anyway, don't they? I don't know. If you know of any like benefits to removing your records, like does it make them less likely to hunt you down or anything? Let me know in the comments and let me know what you think as well. Another one. I don't think church leadership is as nefarious as many ex-Mos believe, despite the problems they cause. Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think most of the LDS leadership is very church broke, as we say. The ability of Haidamon religions and cults to just completely hijack someone's brain, essentially, is so strong. And when you've been doing something your whole life, just decades and decades and decades of indoctrination, and then generations of your family before that, like, I do think that even though I do think a lot of, you know, high up LDS leaders, they know shit. Like, they do know certain stuff, and I think they are aware of the ways that they actively tried to hide certain stuff from members. Maybe not all of them, maybe just some of them, but like, there's no way that that's just completely, you know, they're completely in the dark about that. Like, there is information that you're privy to the further up you go, but I do tend to think that they are just fully brainwashed into the group, for the most part. You know, I don't imagine any of the leaders. I don't know though. I wonder if you know, the sort of tribalism of it all, you know, being so emotionally dependent on the group and having such a strong us versus them mentality and all that stuff. I wonder if that can produce a certain spitefulness sometimes, where certain leaders who maybe have less empathy kind of are a bit more nefarious, or maybe do say certain things to be hurtful. I don't really know. I feel like we can't know either way, but it does seem like there are differences in personality among leadership. Like Bednar, every story I've ever heard about him is just like, he's so mean. But then I tend to believe that people are mean are just that's what life has made them. That's all they know how to be. So yeah, even then, I don't know if nefarious is the right word. Someone said, get vaccinated. I would agree with that. I am vaccinated. Another person said, this might be me gaslighting myself, but I don't think the leaders at the top have malicious intent. Again, yeah, I don't think you're gaslighting yourself. I think that is a reasonable thing to believe. Someone else also said, being rude to missionaries we run into just supports their biases against us. Yeah, I agree with that. Men know about polygamy but leave over polyandry because they cling to patriarchy. I don't know if that one's true. Yeah, I could definitely imagine men being more disturbed by polyandry, because I think a lot of men in the church are like, oh, extra wives, sweet. It's not that, it's not as horrifying to imagine having multiple wives as it is having to share your husband with multiple women. So maybe there's some truth to that one. I don't know if I know anyone who's left just because of polyandry. But maybe there is something about, patriarchal mindsets does make men a lot more affected by polyandry than polyamory. That seems like polygamy. That seems like a valid theory. But let me know if you know anyone like that, or if you were like that. This is a safe space. Someone else said, alcohol and porn aren't perfectly harmless, which I agree with. We know that alcohol isn't good for you. I think I think anyone who does drink alcohol should have an awareness of how it's not harmless. Like, that's an important part of having a healthy relationship with alcohol, and making sure that it is something you do in moderation. And then porn, porn can absolutely be exploitative. Porn is obviously a high stimulation activity, and just like with going on our phones or, I don't know, online shopping, gambling, anything, like there's a component of, anything that's giving you so much dopamine at once, you can become quote unquote addicted to. I say that, my perspective of addiction, I actually don't remember the name of the researcher, so that's a sucky of me, but I kind of tend to agree with this podcast episode I listened to of 10% Happier, which had an addiction researcher on it, who said that basically we're all somewhere on the addiction spectrum. And it's not really about the thing that you're addicted to. It's about like how much you need sort of those external sources of dopamine, or those like intense hits. Porn is highly stimulating, and I think that can have an impact on the brain, just if you online shop all the time, like your brain sort of becomes dependent on that as a source of dopamine. So just from like an overstimulation perspective, I think porn can potentially be problematic, and it can be exploitative. It can also be healthy, and again, all things in moderation. So totally depends on the type of porn, obviously. I also do think it's concerning how children are learning about sex through porn, which is obviously a fantasy depiction of sex a lot of the time. And it does concern me how much being violent towards women is normalized in porn. Like, I understand kink, but I don't know that it's good for us to just constantly be exposed to women being treated violently as, sexy. I am worthy, period. Yeah. I would like for that to not be an unpopular opinion. Ex-Mo Facebook support groups can be really triggering and can do more harm than good. I'd love to hear more of that person's perspective on how they can be really triggering. I think when you're leaving a high demand religion like Mormonism, it can be a very traumatic experience, and kind of any exposure to stuff relating to that could potentially be triggering. So that's just kind of how trauma can work, or traumatic things can work. I guess I would have to know what type of content they were talking about. I think, for example, being angry after you leave Mormonism is a valid stage. That ideally doesn't last forever, because you want to sort of heal and move past that. I know sometimes people have criticisms of ex-Mormon support groups being like too focused on that aspect. And I do think it's important that we as a community talk about how to move through anger, and how anger is valid. But maybe there can be that tendency for people to sort of get stuck in that phase, which is super understandable. But yeah, I don't know. Let me know what you think about ex-Mo Facebook support groups. If you've been in any, I'd be curious. And if you gave that question, I'd love more context. Nuance Ho is super overrated. I would have to disagree. But that also did come from Nuance Ho, full disclosure. Someone else said alcohol is nasty AF. Yeah, that's just one of those subjective opinions, isn't it? I mean, alcohol is an acquired taste. Alcohol and coffee, they're both about kind of developing a taste for bitterness, aren't they? And alcohol that used to be disgusting to me now is very pleasant. Like, it's quite, my palate is excited by it, you know? And I think my palate for bitterness has definitely advanced over the years. But yeah, I think a lot of people can relate to thinking alcohol is just nasty. And maybe some people just think it's nasty forever. I don't know. All right, those are all the ones I'm going to answer for now. I only posted it on our Instagram like 2 hours ago, and those are all the ones that came in. I suspect there will be more, so I think I'm going to do a bonus Patreon video responding to some more later. So if you don't support us on Patreon, you should. I hope you're all doing well. Leave more of your unpopular opinions in the comments. I'd love to make this a discussion, as always. And also, as always, I stand by nothing that I said, okay? Have a good one. Bye.